In this demo, we'll cover how to enable the most flexible way to restrict access to your CDN through a premium feature called CDN Token Authentication. This authentication is useful in scenarios where you do not want to share your Azure SaaS token since it provides access to your underlying storage account, but do still want to restrict access to the CDN itself. In this authentication scheme, your Azure Storage SaaS token will still remain hidden to end users, but you'll also be able to generate CDN security tokens that you can distribute to end users for securing your endpoint. After we configure this feature, we'll discuss some of the benefits and drawbacks. Let's go over how this will look visually. Similar to the last authentication method where the SaaS token is hidden from the user and passed by the CDN to Azure Storage, we'll now introduce another security token generated by the CDN. What's interesting about these CDN tokens is that they can be generated at will using some CDN tooling Azure provides, then given to your users as you see fit. The token contains its own rules such as what country of origin it can allow, what URL paths to allow, and more. The CDN validates this token, then proceeds to use the hidden SaaS authentication flow we configured previously. This allows your Azure SaaS token to remain hidden from users, but still allows you to restrict access to the CDN using various other rules and features. Time to see how it's done. We're going to continue using the same premium CDN profile I showed in the previous demo. Once we go into the supplemental portal, it opens the token auth configuration page. This token will represent a secure encrypted token that Azure CDN can read and then run rules against to allow or restrict access dynamically for our users. The first step we need to do is define our encryption key. Now, I have two choices here. I can either use a terribly insecure key for demo purposes, or I can show you how to generate a proper encryption key using the recommended tools. Can you guess what I'm going to do? Of course I'm going to show you the right way, because as you'll see, doing it right is not all that hard. The tool we'll use is OpenSSL, which is freely available for multiple platforms, and you can find that at openssl.org. Now the thing about OpenSSL is that if you want to use it, you need to build it yourself. That part can be hard if you haven't done it before, but luckily if you're on Linux or Mac, there's a very good chance OpenSSL is already installed on your distribution. Since I can't necessarily recommend a Windows release in this course, I'll point you to the right direction on the official OpenSSL community wiki where they collect binary releases you can download for your platform. Since I'm on Windows 10, we could install OpenSSL or OpenSSH in the Windows features, but I'll take advantage of Bash on Windows. So let's hit the Windows key R to bring up the Windows run prompt and type in bash. Now we'll type the command OpenSSL rand-hex 250 to generate a cryptographically secure random hex string that's 250 characters long, which is the maximum our encryption key can be in Azure CDN. I'll also execute it again to get a backup key. Now I'll highlight the primary key to select it and hit enter to copy. Let's go back to the browser and paste this into the first key text box. Then we need the backup key, so I'll switch back to bash, copy it, and then go paste it once more into this backup key box. The other thing we'll need to make sure here is the version is set to v3, since this is the recommended version by Azure for new keys. Then let's hit update. There, it wasn't too hard to do the right thing. Let's move on. Now that we have our keys in place, we can generate our encrypted security tokens. If you scroll through here, there are a host of other parameters we could fill out that will run certain rules for tokens, including things like a token expiration time, restricting a client IP address range, the country a user can be from, and more, which you can read about in this documentation shown. The main one to call out though is the expiration time. This is given as a Unix epoch timestamp in seconds, so you'll most likely need to use a tool to find that. I like to use this tool called Epoch Converter, which is easy to use. For our demo purposes, I won't be expiring our token, but I should point out if you have set an expiration on your Azure SaaS token, you should make sure you set the expiration for these tokens to be the same so they'll all expire around the same time. It'll just be a lot more predictable then. We will need to fill in at least one parameter though to generate a key to use. Why don't we generate a token that will only allow us to access the 3 images on our static site? We'll do that by filling in this ECAllowURL parameter and use the value static site/image. The CDN will match the beginning of the path with this value relative to the root of the URL after the hostname. So we'll need to include the container name. Once we generate our key, let's copy it to our clipboard because now we need to update our rules engine configuration. Paste your token somewhere you can refer back to as we'll need later. I'll go ahead and paste it into my terminal here. Back in the portal, let's hover over HTTP large again and this time choose the rules engine. In the last demo where we configured hidden SaaS authentication, we created a rule to append our Azure SaaS token to the incoming request. To configure token authentication, we actually need to create a very similar rule and just modify it slightly. If you didn't watch the last clip and are interested in exactly how we build this rule in detail, I recommend backpedaling a bit, but we'll still create this one together. The rules engine works by running match conditions. This first condition says if always, which means it'll always run. Then we add a rule feature using this plus button and choose the URL rewrite feature from the dropdown, which inspects the source request and rewrites it to a destination request. In this case, we'll use a regular expression that says match the static site / literal path and then capture whatever the user enters afterward and store it into a group reference. We'll then map that back to the static site path followed by whatever the user entered after it. But this time we also append the SAS token in the query string. If you followed the previous demo, you'll notice I'm using an ampersand here instead of a question mark. Since the user will already be entering the CDN token in the query string on the source request, we actually need to append the SAS token to that string, so that's why we use an ampersand. The next thing we'll do is enable token authentication for this rule. We'll click the plus button again here next to feature, and then select the token auth feature from the dropdown, which you can't really see, and we'll set this to enabled. This is how the CDN will know to validate the incoming CDN token on the request. Now we're ready to create the rule and test it out, but I'm not actually going to do that. Notice this callout here that it could take quite a long time to actually activate the new rules, and I don't want to take such a long break from recording this demo, so I've already created this rule as shown here for you. I just want to note here that if you previously navigated to our new CDN endpoint to load the demo site before enabling this rule, the blob demo files will be cached in the CDN. You'll need to go back to the Azure portal and purge the CDN cache before trying to test this rule. In fact, anytime you need to change rules like this, there's always a possibility the CDN has cached previous content that may now be forbidden, so it's wise to purge the CDN after rule changes. To test the rule, let's open a new tab and type in the CDN endpoint URL and path to the static site index.html file. Before I execute this request though, what we should expect to happen is that our request should be denied by the CDN since we have not provided the security token. Yes, we got a 403 forbidden, we were denied. You can customize the response Azure CDN sends back during a denied request using that token auth configuration page we saw earlier. But now let's try appending our security token to the URL. Remember, this is not our SAS token, but our generated CDN token. Let me grab mine from the terminal I pasted in earlier. Okay, and now let's paste it in here after our query string, and try that. Good, it still failed. Remember, we set our CDN token to only allow paths to our static site container image files. Let's actually try requesting image1.jpg. That request was allowed. Fantastic, it looks like our security token is properly configured. Covering everything there is to know about how to generate CDN security tokens and what features they allow is beyond the scope of this course. But again, I'll point you in the right direction. If you follow this link, it will bring you to the Microsoft Docs on how to configure token authentication in more depth. Now that we've walked through configuring CDN token authentication, let's go over some of the benefits and drawbacks. The first benefit is that we were able to lock down our CDN, but still keep our Azure SAS token hidden. Remember, the SAS token is a password equivalent for Azure Storage, but our CDN token is totally separate. It only grants access to the CDN and contains CDN-specific rules. Now that we're using the CDN tokens to allow or deny access, it's possible for us to revoke tokens without impacting the Azure SAS token itself. To revoke CDN tokens, we would rotate the encryption keys we used. Since the CDN validates tokens, we don't need to enable dynamic query string caching, so this will reduce Azure storage load and therefore incur less Azure storage costs. Finally, the CDN tokens can be generated with a host of specific features, like restricting country of origin, managing IP addresses, or restricting URL paths, and these are all validated by the CDN at request time. As for drawbacks, there are several. Configuring CDN token authentication adds an additional layer of complexity since you now need to track and manage the lifetime of two types of tokens, the CDN-specific tokens and the Azure SAS tokens. It will require a greater degree of process around generating and distributing these tokens. Since this is an advanced CDN feature, it does require the premium pricing SKU, which will incur higher costs. You also saw how rule changes can take a while to become active, and in addition, you'll need to manually update Azure SAS tokens for any rules you have if they expire or change. While Microsoft may add an API to manage rules configuration, this does currently hinder automation scenarios. While CDN token provides the most customization and security for your CDN, you will need to weigh the added complexity against the value it'll add.